challenges. And we found across New Zealand around about 60 projects back then that were well advanced underway. And there was a bias to those. A lot of work happening in those days around biodiversity and monitoring the conservation estate, and some work around land use and sort of land cover mapping and auditing. If I fast forward to 2025 today, we've really seen a mushrooming of that activity. So we're seeing work happening around sort of forest, farm, crop monitoring. We're seeing work emerging now into that large language model space with things like agronomy advice on farm, on demand, on your phone to the farmer. We're seeing some interesting work around robotics, which is a harder problem around the sort of hardware side. And a proliferation of work in pests and predators, or that's continued from that early work. So a really good advance, and it's starting to, I think, have an impact, Mark, across the landscape.
Matt, look, that's a great intro. Let's get into some more practical examples where you're seeing what AI is driving in terms of measurable climate impact. We hear a lot of talk about potential, but let's try and drive, if we can, into some of the things you've observed from your expertise, particularly, say, through improved data or platform integration or other applications of AI tools.
Yeah, sure. In thinking about this talk today, three come to mind that I think are really good for people to think about and take away. One is around monitoring carbon sequestration across New Zealand grazing land, cropland, or smaller forested areas that is not in the ETS program. So using AI with the remote sensing, satellite information, and sort of drone type inputs, and also LiDAR, a lot of which of that is publicly available. It's possible to determine a carbon asset across your landscape, across your farm, and then use that as part of your emissions reporting. That really wasn't possible without AI. It was just too much of a lift, too much sort of mapping on farm work. Second one is a company called Halter, that some will be aware of, and they have these AI-enabled smart collars for cattle.
Everyone should be aware of Halter, hopefully.
Exactly. Really cool. And what it allows the collar to talk to a satellite, talk to a farm database, and understand perhaps the application of inputs, nutrients, and so on, and optimize the situation. So where there might be good growing grazing pasture elsewhere, the herd can be shifted automatically using that collar, which actually leads to virtual fencing or fenceless farms. So 2 or 3 savings there, which reduces nitrous oxide, improves the sort of feed wedge utilization, and just drives efficiency out of the New Zealand farming system. So lower emissions farming ultimately is possible. And the third one, just briefly to touch on, a company called AIMA, who are doing some really interesting work around smartphone pasture recognition. Just with a smartphone on a farm, take a read of the thickness of grass effectively to get the kilograms of dry matter. And again, that allows you to minimize any additional nutrients, reducing your emissions, and ensuring that herd is as happy as it can be and producing efficient protein.
Look, that's very helpful, Matt. Those sort of specific examples are, I think, what people often want to latch onto. Just the final question for you in this section. What do you think are going to be some of the key enablers that will allow these solutions in particular, or perhaps others, to scale? And so what still needs to improve in the examples you've talked about?
We're almost there. I think in New Zealand, there's always a lack of capital. So doing some of these things requires innovative entrepreneurial people like Halter and AIMA who've done that well to drive those outcomes. We can probably provide better underpinning now. Now there's more, I guess, recent history of success. It'll become easier for the banks, the financiers to back great Kiwi companies taking on these challenges. We have a really good advantage in New Zealand. The co-op model, a lot of the large growers tend to federate into supply groups. In red meat, there's 20 or so processing groups that tag to a group of suppliers or farmers. Dairy, similar. You've got the Zest breeds, you've got Turners and Growers. These sorts of groups are a natural, I think, audience for faster uptake. Actually, in other countries, there's not quite that structure. So that's a benefit. And the last challenge is, I think, the interoperability. And if we get a chance to talk later, it's sort of having a common fabric or a common set of underpinning data that allows AI to talk to AI to deliver a solution or a decision to a farmer. So that's an area to work on and develop.
Matt, thanks so much. That's a great insight, I think, into some of both the opportunities and also potential development areas. And look, let's try and explore more of those as we get through. I want to move now to Auriga Martin, who's the CEO of Farm Focus and one of my colleagues on the NZTech Sustainability Subboard. I should note we have a couple of other colleagues also who've joined us, Shane Kerr and Dana Cohn-Hardy. Welcome. So Auriga, you're obviously involved also in the primary sector, but we've asked you to particularly sort of take a step back and look at some of the global activities that are taking place. You operate, of course, both at a farm level, but also must be mindful of the international environment. So let's start with that big picture. How are you seeing AI's climate potential develop internationally, and what stands out as most promising?
Well, thank you very much again for the opportunity to be here today. Clearly, I'm a transplant from another country. I was lucky to grow up in the big tech sector in California and scale as one of the original founding employees of lynda.com. So I get very excited about the tech. I think the biggest promising opportunity facing ag global is around processing and compute power. Matt, you mentioned, well, actually, you mentioned NVIDIA. I was at the event last night celebrating their growth and scale and traction globally in the North American market. Part of what has made that possible is their NVIDIA chip partnership. And when you think about companies like NVIDIA and partnerships like with AWS, for example, and putting in that proper infrastructure for scale in the ag sector, you suddenly have opportunities that did not exist before of modeling and predicting outcomes. NVIDIA in particular has a digital twin of the entire world's environmental standard and any possible outcome that you would need to model to plan better land stewardship, planning on farm, looking at resilient business management for farms. So at Farm Focus, we very much focus on the financial aspects of farming. It's important to think about long-term land management and asset management on the whole, not reinventing playbooks in New Zealand, but instead testing and proving quickly with farms here in this country. So the compute power and some of that neural network capability that is just exponentially growing is mind-blowing.
Auriga, that's terrific. Let's move on. You could keep on going, I know, because there's a lot to say. But I want to also just make reference to one of the tools that we put on the platform, which is BCG's AI for Climate Work framework. We've got that as a reference piece of information with its 4 pillars: measurement, reduction, removal, adaptation. Good piece of consulting work there, Louise, by our competitor. What do you think that emerging synergies or alignments are that are beginning to appear that might be relevant to New Zealand businesses looking at how to approach this?
Yeah, well, there's a very common term that's taking hold globally around precision agriculture. And what is getting measured is certainly getting managed. And therefore, you can commit and adhere to international standards around those 4 pillars. With precision ag, you have much more better decision-making capability. The second round of the emission scheme is a really good example of that. There will be a lot of incentives and motivators for farm behavior change, but also the end-to-end food supply chain, committing and adhering to these standards. So New Zealand has a very unique opportunity, I think, because we are a small nation and everyone is a phone call away. We've done work with, obviously, the Common Ground report and our sustainability subboard. And if we can work unanimously as one team, I think that we have an opportunity to take hold of these international standards and show that they work quickly and introduce those feedback loops quite quickly with private and public sector collaboration.
Look, I think that's a really important point to make. And maybe just taking a step back, that climate technology roadmap framework I mentioned earlier, I talked about the 7 foundations that we've got in there, things like skills, regulation, funding. We also talked about the enablers, of course, of which AI is one. The verticals, of course, are the sectors. And the big 3 for New Zealand are agriculture, energy, and transport. Bit of focus from our experts in the ag sector, of course, but transport and energy are also areas where there are huge opportunities. We work in the transport sector. We've been aggregating data using AI for quite some time, well before ChatGPT, and similarly in energy. So I just want to make sort of people aware of the fact that the tools we're talking about, this priority of measuring that Auriga worked about is as relevant to the primary sector as it is to others. Auriga, just finishing off, you've also commented, of course, we're missing some foundational elements. What do you think the biggest gaps in New Zealand's approach to using AI for climate tech are right now?
Absolutely capital, as Matt said. We need offshore funding and capital to build up the proper infrastructure, which is why it's great to have AWS here. It's great to have other big players that are interested in partnering with New Zealand capability. I think one great exemplar of one food type, crop type, one product line around cotton is a good kind of use case for what this looks like. Cotton farmers in Australia are subjected to drought and monsoon-like conditions more than any other farm type that there is in the world right now. In Queensland, and specifically, they are going through climate change risk mitigation like we are projected to have in the next few years. So those farms, because they are going direct to consumers that are interested in sustainable products and want to pay the higher premium yields, these farms are getting the offshore investment to invest in full sensor capability, precision ag in terms of water application, fertilizer, chemical intervention. So that's a really great example, and we should all follow suit, but it takes that funding model and that business partnership set up properly.
Look, we might talk some more about that, I think, when we get to sort of how to solve some of these barriers. And look, there's a range of New Zealand companies, particularly NZTech members, who've got access to some of these approaches that I'd encourage you to have a look at the NZTech website. I'll do a sort of extended shout out for AWS because Paul Keating, who is one of the leaders of AWS New Zealand, is on our subboard as well. So look, if you're looking for any particular insight or references from what AWS is doing in New Zealand, I'm sure he wouldn't mind if I said contact him on LinkedIn, Paul Keating, and see what he can do. But just know that there are also New Zealand companies also helping in this space. Auriga, thanks so much for that. Let's move now to Louise. Louise is Sustainability and Climate Lead for Deloitte's consulting practice, an extensive background actually working in the sustainability sector in New Zealand. You're helping large organizations embed AI into sustainability strategy. Let's start with what you're seeing. How are your clients across business and government starting to use AI to support ESG, emissions reduction and climate resilience?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mark, and kia ora tātou. Yeah, many of our clients and really some of New Zealand's largest businesses are now entering into their second year of mandatory climate reporting. So that's a really big moment for many of them. This climate reporting provides insight to investors, stakeholders, and the general public on how a business is not only addressing their physical and transition risks to what they're exposed to through climate change, but also provides the business an opportunity to take a more strategic approach to the real transformation that they will need to undertake to integrate emissions reduction and climate resilience. And to do this is pretty hard, as you can imagine, to have access to the right data, identifying the gaps of that data and being able to predict the future supported by evidence is hard. And so what we're starting to see is that organisations are looking for the tools that will enable and support this. Some really great opportunities which we're already seeing is organisations being able to use AI-driven platforms to optimise their energy consumption by analysing patterns, suggesting improvements to help an organisation reduce their direct emissions and, of course, to reduce costs. We're also seeing massive uptick of AI to automate data collection and to be able to do the foundation reporting and ensuring not only the accuracy, but also reducing that manual effort. And much of that effort is actually outside of their direct control. If you think about Scope 3 emissions, somebody else is emitting something. So you've got to be able to collect that, you've got to be able to trust that, and you've got to be able to get that assured. That is significant in the mandatory disclosure frameworks that exist not only here in New Zealand into the future, but also where we're exporting products to. We're also seeing AI do the really hard stuff, modelling carbon footprints, identifying areas of reduction, transport routes, as you mentioned, supply chain improvements. And one thing that I'm really excited about is that generally, mandatory disclosures are a one-year report. You put it out there in the world, people read it. But what we're starting to see now is organisations implementing the reporting mechanisms, the tools to support that, so they can actually report on a much more regular basis and use that information for the decisions they need to be able to reduce their emissions and potentially address climate resilience. So that's great for us to see.
Got to be the benefit of doing the report, right? Getting the value, using the value created.
Totally, it's got to help with decision making. Yeah.
Let's get down, if we can, next to perhaps case studies or examples that you can talk about where you're seeing AI move beyond pilot stage, and look, we actually know there are many, into more embedded strategic use. Are there any particular references that you can speak to? You've talked at a number of, high level about a number, but any you'd like to call out as examples?
Yeah, I mean, outside of obviously ag, well, no, actually, I'll take it back into ag because I come from an ag background. So let's put thumbs up for New Zealand's agricultural sector. One thing we are seeing, which is super exciting, is how AI can personalize an experience right from the farm through to the customer and really bring that voice of the producer of the land in which the product was produced from right into the hands of the person who's buying it, so that they can not only deeply trust it, but they can learn about where their food comes from. And it enables that connection right through the value chain. And hopefully what we'll start to see by real leaders like Silver Fern Farms, Fonterra, and other producers is that they can start to demonstrate and tell the story of stewardship in a way that's never been able to before, where that person can actually see the face of the farmer. They can go right back to the animal. They can start to really understand the value that's being provided to them, and hopefully that value is shared back to the farmer and obviously to the land itself. So that's really exciting for us to see, and it's really helping support sustainable farming practices and brand authenticity, which is great.
And look, I know in my industry, transport, there's of course many other examples, many frankly people will be unaware of. So many of the camera units that are used to survey transport, both on motorways and in cities, of course, have that. Downers, for example, when they deploy camera units for computer vision or security, they have a role to play there. A number of our cities also employ AI sensors to monitor pedestrian movements and safety issues as well. People may not be aware of that, and I think the challenge, particularly on local authorities, is to be more transparent around that, because I think if people are being monitored, they want to know, not only do they want to know that, they want to see the benefit. And so the extension from a smart cities background, which we work in, is actually creating a dashboard that kind of gives people visibility of that sort of information, obviously anonymized. But if we're putting, say, for example, in a hotspot area where there's maybe potentially safety issues, we're actually producing either the real-time pictures of the analyzed information, so people can see what's being tracked and see the benefit. I think that's an important element. And just to finish off, Louise, in this section again, sort of taking a step back, what leadership signals or system-wide changes do you think are needed, either from business or from government or other parties, third sector, to accept
it's going to take
responsible use?
And it's going to take everyone. We know one of the most significant things we can do is really ensure that ethics are at the heart of any tech development, that we understand not only the impact on the precious resources Te Taio gives us, and certainly in relation to AI, that's obviously energy and water, but also, you mentioned it, the ethics around data and who owns that data, who's given that data for somebody else to be able to potentially extract value from. Really important that we look back, into and reflect back on, Te Ao Māori worldview of data. Who actually owns it? Who's going to be using it? This is really critical for us to think about. What we've really got to think about also is the transparency in the development. It's about building trust, ensuring collaboration, but also really at the heart of it, ensuring that we're investing well for sustainable AI research that actually drives the breakthroughs. Because one thing we do know about AI is it actually will help us solve the climate challenge, but we've got to balance its impact on a warming planet as well, though that's a real tension that we're only just starting to really understand and be able to address, because we all get so excited about using ChatGPT when actually it might not necessarily be the best thing at that time to use, just because of the consumption of energy and in some places just the displacement of water as an example. So we have to think about it system-wise, but we have to also think about deeply planet and people at the core of any decision we're making.
I think that's, I like to think of, what's the sort of vertical tool you're looking to kind of add to your industry, and then what are the horizontal elements you need to be mindful of? So the particular machine learning application you want to kind of leverage into transport or energy or agriculture, there's actually a lot of tools available. But the framework that's going to exist in and be operated by, I think that's the point Louise is making, right? And I know that if we're running our business, it's all too easy to focus on the vertical. But those horizontal elements, that's also, I think, the value that organizations like NZTech and others can bring, just by creating a framework to say, okay, when you're doing this, you just need to be mindful of this. How, for example, cities, as I mentioned before, are using. So what frameworks do they need to have to engage with their citizens and their ratepayers to be aware of that? Another important point has just been made by Kevin on the chat, and I think he was at the presentation I was this is Xero's productivity launched yesterday in Wellington. And what that report, of course, determines is what we know: the productivity gains that can be made from enhancing digital tools. If you've got the capability, it's not as easy as just going to the supermarket, sadly, and buying it. Some of them are. I mean, using ChatGPT, any of us can do, right? But I think what the report shows is that taking as strategic approach as you're able to, just with the one or two things, can be a huge productivity gain. And we know there was an attempt with the Digital Boost activity in the previous few years to try to get more SMEs using digital. That made some progress. Now we've taken a big step up, I think, with the tools that AI is making available. And so that just, I think, reminds us that we know about the opportunity, and what we're trying to, I suppose, give you some insights as to how to be a bit more strategic. Look, thanks for those sort of opening comments. I want to just now do a moderated panel discussion. And again, looking for comments or questions from those of you who are participating. Please, comments or questions are fine, and I'll feed those in as I can. So the first one to the group, we've seen some product examples. You've talked about those. We've also alluded to some of what's holding us back. Auriga, can I go to you first in terms of what's sort of top of your list of things in the sectors and areas you work that are holding us back?
Well, I always, I'm a glass half full type of person, and I always think of risks as huge opportunities, and particularly with all the volatility globally around big tech and corporate and politics, and my country is no example anymore. I think New Zealand has a very unique opportunity to take that data fragmentation that you mentioned, Louise, and actually put together a proper data ethical sovereignty approach. I think it's really exciting to put farmers in the power position where they can opt in to these opportunities to farm differently and farm around land stewardship long term, which is already inherently part of our culture and DNA here in New Zealand. So I think that it's exciting to think about what that looks like from a cross-sector and collaborative perspective, putting together some actual ambition around data usage and management principles.
Auriga, thank you. Matt, from your perspective, it's a big question, but what's holding us back in the areas that you work? What are the things that are holding us back the most?
I think it's been a great sort of thread here, but I think that phase we're in right now is in the start of mass adoption. So we've got a baseline of, I mentioned those 60 projects, and there's probably 600 projects now we could all put our fingers on. So that's a baseline. Now, there's probably a little bit of inequity there. The bigger organizations that have some R&D and have some corporate structure and ability and time are doing well and moving. But there's a gap there, I think, to the wider cohort of New Zealand businesses and organizations who are looking to jump in. So I think there's an opportunity to ensure that we don't have 600 siloed applications. We have, 60 well-federated systems that can be commoditized or can be taken up by the SMEs and the smaller corporates. And the climate problem is really an integrated supply chain problem, isn't it? We talk about scope 3. So your emissions, we all depend on each other in many ways, and particularly in the ag sector, but also in transport and energy. It's being able to monitor your impact on the planet through your supply chain. And almost certainly there'll be 5 or 6 other companies that should be talking about the same data point and using the same data point. They all shouldn't have to build their own models and own predictive analytics to enable that. So I think those of us who work in the field, NZTech, have a big role to play here, and government does too, I think, to stimulate and foster the coordination side to ensure that we get those multiplier benefits.
Matt, I mean, that point was at the heart of the roadmap, the framework that we put together, right? Actually supported by government, because there's so much action and activity. There are so many challenges and opportunities. There's got to be a more strategic way of approaching this. And this roadmap is a tool that's widely used, but it's actually a methodology, and it's what some of the Northern European countries use actually with technology, just as a way of helping organise and promote both ways of dealing with these challenges, helping provide some guidance about priority areas, areas that might be more risky. And so we've got this tool that exists, this framework, and the challenge I think that we're leaning into on the Sustainability Board with allies is trying to get this up so it becomes something that's more useful, that helps address some of those challenges you mentioned. Louise, just to finish off this section about the things that from your perspective or from your client's perspective is holding them or you back.
Yeah, and Matt, kind of touched on this as well. I mean, we're at this this adoption precipice where people are really starting to, understand what's available. But one of the big challenges we have is around the capability of the system. So, right from those who are, deciding what tool they have, to the ones who are funding it, to the ones who are supporting it, how do we ensure that we've got a coordinated leadership, we've got coordinated approaches, we're actually thinking NZ Inc. first, and we're being able to create shared data lakes, whatever it might be, so that people can use AI, even outside of their own control, their own data sets, to be able to gain insight. How do we do that and do that well? This is something that can absolutely accelerate our prosperity, but we've got to be able to take, a coordinated leadership focus, and that's got to be including everyone from right across the sector, not just leaving it to the likes, to whether it's one entity like government to be able to drive that. It's got to be a collective thing to build capability and support. Critical,
because if we all wait for government to do something, we'll die waiting, right? And so I think it's absolutely the job for us in business to be I suppose working collaboratively with these sorts of approaches that we want to take. And then putting pressure on government where it can add value. And somebody was at a session with Judith Collins yesterday. She's got the digitalising government portfolio. And someone said to her, sort of, why can't we be more like Estonia? And she said, look, I'm sick and tired of people saying that. What I want to move to is people talking about why can't I be more like New Zealand in terms of what she wants to do with government. So I think having that kind of leadership at government is essential if we want to make progress. But we've got a job to do, I think, Louise, as you say. Just second quick question. This is a series of 3 quick questions. The second one really is around, where is the one area you would double down in the next 12 to 24 months? So if you had a task and a fund and support to make the most progress in AI for climate tech, Matt, I'll start to you, then I'll go to you, Louise, and finish with you, Auriga. What's the one area that you would want to focus on, Matt?
I think for me, it is in, and I'm going to come back to ag, just because I think in terms of our climate challenge, it's our biggest proportion, and we've been grappling with how does agriculture come into the scheme. I personally think, and we work closely with Silver Fern Farms as an example, they are trying to sell net zero positive protein to the world and positioning pasture-fed New Zealand, beautiful produce on pasture-fed farms as a premium product. The other side of the coin. Cattle have a methane challenge, so there's a lot of work and a lot of actually good cross-sector investment into that methane climate challenge problem. AgriZero, among other groups, have invested in a number of startups. There's a huge amount of data building around that challenge. So our goal, I think, as a country is to develop that low methane herd and improve that position, so ag can actually come in confidently and a bit like Norway, be a leader in this space in terms of including all parts of our economy into a realistic and achievable target to put us in a stronger trading position.
Boris Johnson won't go down in history as having had a terribly successful prime ministership, but one thing he hopefully will be famous for is saying he's looking to New Zealand to solve this methane problem.
He did, yes.
And I think
and we're working on it.
Well,
yes.
And we absolutely are. And as we've heard, also actually an area where government is providing some lean in with the emissions reduction plan, as Auriga mentioned, that they produced. Louise, what's your one big thing?
Let me just add another thing that Boris Johnson did. He appointed Mark Carney to be the lead for COP in Glasgow. So let's hope that Canada suddenly becomes a leader in climate action, right? So yeah, I mean, for me, it's all about ambition. We have got the opportunity of the globe to be able to lead in not only sustainable agriculture, not only feeding people with products that come from a land of plenty, but also bringing technology to be able to solve some of the world's problems. So we have to think ambitiously. We have to embed AI into core business, not only into ESG strategy or sustainability strategies or climate disclosures, but into the core of an organization's business to be able to unlock the opportunities. Because as it's already been said, this is not about risk. This is about the opportunities that we have. We have to manage the risk in order to be able to achieve those opportunities. So we've got to look at the investment for climate, for resilience, using tools like AI as an investment rather than a cost. And that, I think, will unlock boards, holders of capitals, whatever it might be, to make ambitious decisions into the future.
And there are a range of people who can help with that. Obviously, NZTech is really, I suppose, working at a country level with the approach we're taking with the framework. But Louise, you just reminded me of the Sustainable Business Network, who are one of our partners. They have a range of really useful tools for SME businesses, carbon tracking tools, just for one-person businesses who really don't have time to appoint a chief sustainability officer. But the Sustainable Business Network, and there are others, have things that you should check out if you're looking for guidance in this area. Auriga, what's your one double down area for the next 12 months?
One very specific thing that opens an umbrella of possibility, sensor tech and the automation that brings on to farms and grower producers, being able to make decisions in real time, but also setting up mitigations that reduce cost and overhead and risk. Security of that food supply chain is very important, and with sensors and automation and the AI benefits of crunching those numbers in real time, there's a lot more that we can do to help growers be precise with their overheads and the way they scale and grow more food ultimately.
Look, I've just come from the launch, I think it is, of AUT's new Data Science and AI Centre. They say that's the first in New Zealand. And one of the academics was talking exactly about the sort of developing trends and applications for sensor use. I mean, from a transport point of view, that's the thing that actually we've been using for a very long time, that's starting to track information. And so I just think making that something that's more visible, more accessible, better priced.
And thinking about all senses too, all 5 senses. There's some incredible audio tech out there. Masco is just won CEO of the year for the audio detection and prevention of piggery health in piggery farms. So with audio detection, but yeah.
Look, we've got just a couple of minutes left. I'm going to briefly say, even though, as Matt said, ag is our big challenge, the biggest opportunity I think that exists in New Zealand is in the energy space. One of the big 3. I'm not going to say transport because we're making some progress there. We're underdone in terms of our AI application use in the energy system. AI algorithms can be much more involved forecasting energy consumption patterns, helping optimize grid usage, and particularly looking at the integration of distributed resources, because what's happening is, of course, with renewable energy, we're increasingly getting what are called distributed energy sources, and that is wind farms, solar farms that actually exist in their own world. So AI's got a critical role to kind of bring those together. To finish off, I've got one last question for all of you, and that's, I think, what's the biggest climate opportunity that's going untapped? Or if you could change one government policy to fast track climate, what would it be? So biggest opportunity untapped, or one government policy change, what would it be? Louise, let me start with you.
Oh, that you threw that one at the end, and I think, okay. I think coming back to your energy point, the biggest benefit we have in the world is the sun. So, what we need to do is we really need to think about how we enable the electrification of all the things that we have, and use AI to be able to support the optimization of those assets, whether it's electricity that can be stored at your homes through your EV car battery, whether it's the electrification on farms and the sharing of excess power during crises or weather events. These are really massive opportunities for us, and will enable what is our most significant asset, our energy grid, to be able to be sustainable into the future. I think that's a huge opportunity for us, and something that we need to be able to get that entire system to work together, because as much as we hate it, the sun it's always gonna shine. So we've got to be able to really take advantage of that.
We're right at time. Matt, just a really quick finish off. What's your takeaway that you want to leave people with?
Yeah, quickly, I think if the government were to move on a policy, looking at that task force for nature-related financial disclosures would be a really good one to pick, and that would span all the industries and level up everyone in terms of their impact on nature, but also, as we've said today, the opportunity. And I think that would lift the bar for everyone. It would allow us to really get focused and sharp on this problem.
Auriga, your one leave behind for us?
I have to say, as a capitalist, we need to attract that capital from offshore faster and more efficiently. If you look at Ireland as a GDP market and their growth and what they've done for innovation hubs and offshore global investment, that tax incentives, and a more clever way of helping companies land, but retain our IP in New Zealand. So that data sovereignty piece is probably a really important part of that.
And Auriga, that's a fantastic segue to Michael's last question about how we see climate challenge VCs like Motion Capital playing a role. That they have to play a role. That's why we had funding as a core foundation in the roadmap, because sustainable finance, the Centre for Sustainable Finance is doing some good job there, but we make it too difficult actually for both offshore and onshore funding to get into to play. And so that's a piece of work that area is certainly picking up. Look, I hope today has sparked some ideas. Thank you for giving us 30 to 40 minutes of your time. Join NZTech and keep in touch with the Sustainability Subboard work. If anything that we've said is a catalyst for you, submit a case study to you. We've got on our website now climate tech examples that you can go and have a look at. Send that to info@nztech.org.nz, subject Sustainability Subboard. Or reach out to us through LinkedIn. You can see where Mark Thomas, Louise Aitken, Auriga Martin, and Matt Lythe. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Tech Week.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.